Hello, and thanks for tuning in to World Update with John Moran. I'm your host, Finbar Markey. Every week I'm joined by John Moran, former head of the foreign desk with the Irish Press, and we're going to look at news stories that have emerged from around the world that maybe haven't had a fair and a balanced hearing in the corporate media. Thanks for joining us again this week, John.
My pleasure, Finbar.
And what have you got for us?
It's a good bit going on here. We've had a meeting in Reykjavik, a rare meeting of the Council of Europe. I think it's met about 4 times in the 70 years it's been around. As war rages in Ukraine, one aging pan-European institution hopes to reclaim its historic role at the heart of the continent. Almost 50 heads of government are gathering this week in Iceland for what is only the fourth Council of Europe summit since the body was created 74 years ago in the aftermath of World War II. Focused on human rights, the Council was original post-war forum for discussion among European leaders. Items on the agenda this week include a tentative first step towards a compensation mechanism for victims of the war in Ukraine. But officials and academics admit that Russian aggression in Europe was not the only reason to arrange the first Council summit since 2005. The arrival of a new kid on the block, Emmanuel Macron's European Political Community, EPC, has forced Strasbourg-based council to defend its patch. With questions raised about the value of so many pan-European bodies, the Council, which employs 2,200 people and has an annual budget of 479 million, is scrambling to justify its existence. There is a very, very crowded marketplace now in the European institutions, said Richard Whitman, Professor of European Politics and International Relations at the University of Kent. Crisis in Sudan as refugees flee fighting. As villages in western Sudan empty, villages in eastern Chad are filling up with tens of thousands of refugees, driven from their homes by fighting in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, and by instability in the troubled region of Darfur. The surge in conflict is the latest ordeal for the region that has been traumatized by 2 decades of violence, and it has deepened a humanitarian crisis in Chad, where hundreds of thousands of people displaced from Darfur had already taken refuge. It's the first time so many people are bringing everything they can, said Alexandre Roche-Gimprick, the International Rescue Committee's country director for Chad. It's also the first time so many of them say, we're not coming back. Meanwhile, Sudanese army leader General Abdel Fattah Burhan has ordered the official bank accounts of the rapid support forces held in Sudanese banks to be frozen. Syrian leader invited to COP28 climate talks. Embattled Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has received an invitation to attend the upcoming COP28 climate in Dubai later this year, even as the US Army illegally controls 1/3 of his country, including the major oil wells. President Assad's invite comes as he is already scheduled to attend the Arab League summit on Friday in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, years after being frozen out of regional politics due to the violent upheavals between the region's Sunni and Shia Muslim communities. It has been widely noted by commentators that the US illegally controls far more of Syria than Russia does of Ukraine. Runoff election in Turkey. After heading into elections with high hopes, Turkey's political opposition is now struggling to give their candidate, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, a fighting chance against President Recep Erdogan in a runoff. Mr. Erdogan looks likely to be the primary beneficiary of voters from supporters of the ultranationalist third candidate, Sinan Ogan, who has been eliminated. The runoff will take place on Monday. Quad meeting cancelled. Australia has cancelled the Quad Security Dialogue Summit in Sydney after President Biden cancelled his Australian visit due to pressing US debt negotiations in Washington. NATO's rising sun. As we mentioned last week, despite the jarring geographical location, NATO boss Jens Stoltenberg has just set up an office in Tokyo, Japan, in Eastern Asia, nowhere near the North Atlantic, but handy for the upcoming conflict with China, amid increasing anti-China rhetoric in NATO countries.
That's a good brief overview, John, of some of the things that are happening in the world. And it's hard to pick and choose. We have a few other stories that we're going to look at as well. But just before we move on and look at those other stories, just to pick out two in particular that you mentioned there. First of all, Assad's invitation to a global event, which is essentially what it is, Bashar al-Assad from Syria. The warming of relations, the reintroduction into the Arab League last week. There's a lot of anger in the United States and Europe about this. I have come across that on Twitter myself. I've seen people regurgitating already settled allegations about chemical weapons attacks that have been proven now to be based on doctored reports and things like that. Do you really feel that this is it for Syria now, John, from the point of view that they're back in warm relationships with their neighbours, and that a change of leader in some other country is not going to bring us back to square one in terms of trying to create a permanent peace in Syria?
Well, luckily enough, it's not even just Syria. It's the thawing of relations between all the countries in the region who are either Sunni or Shia and who had been at each other's throats for this past 20 years, basically since 9/11, when the world was upturned to a great degree. But though the easing of those religious tensions are massive in the region, and Syria is now meeting up with all the local leaders of the Sunni religion, who are the opposite of his Shia country, although he himself isn't Shia, he's a Christian.
And very much linked to this is the Turkish presidential elections and election results, which, at least through Western media, and a lot of commentators are seeing this through the prism of US versus Russia, and that on the one hand, Erdogan's main opponent and primary opponent that he'll be running off with over the next few weeks in a second poll, that he is seen to be pro-Western. Erdogan would be more veering towards global peace and in favor, I suppose, in many ways, of retaining relationships with Russia. And so it's been perceived as that. And so the Turkish election, in a way, is a smaller version of what's happening right across the Mideast, I think, is it?
It is to a certain extent, although I can't see any way President Erdogan is going to lose this particular vote, because the third candidate was a nationalist like himself, and he'll get a lot of support there. However, it's always possible that when the electorate see the two candidates, they might change their minds. But I think he's an odds-on favourite for the election on Monday.
Yeah. You mentioned also in your introductory overview, you mentioned NATO offices opening up in Japan, and we did touch upon that last week. I have a video here of a Democratic senator from the US. I think her name is Jackie Rosen, something like that. We'll get that in a minute. But she is decrying and giving out and complaining about China arranging peace agreements around the world and things like that. Let's have a look at this video and we'll be back in a wee minute.
China has rapidly increased its engagement around the world. It includes actually trying to broker troubling agreements to reestablish diplomatic ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia, offering to broker peace deals between Ukraine and the Russian aggressors. So these incidents, they highlight China's persistent presence and intention to exert its influence and match the U.S. as a global power. So how can the U.S. address China's increasing involvement in global diplomatic matters? And can we expect to see more countries try to turn to China as a mediator? And what do you think the implications of this pivot would mean to us?
Thank you, Senator. It's a very thoughtful question.
What do you make of that, John?
Yeah, what are the implications of all these peace moves? Said with a disturbed voice. It's from a country that has been creating all the wars around the world this past 20 years. I suppose it is a bit off-putting if someone starts running around organizing peace when wars were the way you got to being the top dog. So it can be understood in that sense that they don't control things anymore. I think I'd be inclined to take it along those lines, that it's a disturbance caused by the fact that what used to exist no longer exists. And they're only now copping on to that fact, that there is another part of the world. It's a multipolar world. It's not unipolar anymore. And she has to get with the program.
And isn't it also a reflection that countries seem to trust China more than the United States these days? And it's more than an acknowledgement, it's an admission on the part of the United States that it has lost the trust of a lot of countries around the world with its behavior, particularly in the last 12 to 18 months, I think.
Well, can I say, I don't think they ever had the trust of a lot of countries. I mean, there are a lot of countries in the Middle East who despise what America has done in the region as being a partner to Israel against all of the Arab countries there. I mean, that's not something that, will change overnight. And it's the same in Latin America, in Africa, where China will come in and they will build, ports, and they'll build airports, and they'll build road systems and rail systems. And it's quite clear to the locals, which one they prefer. And they don't have this superior attitude or the idea of it being some sort of new colonial enterprise, which is what you get when you hear the like of Blinken talking about Africa, or Ursula von der Leyen talking about Africa, or Joseph Borrell talking about Africa. They have an awful proprietary sense towards it, which I despise personally.
Yeah, and it does seem to be coming to an end. I do believe we're in a new phase of post-colonialism, maybe a far more authentic post-colonialism. The drive towards war with China and things like that are a lot worse than what we've just seen with that Democratic senator. Here's a video of the foreign minister of Lithuania.
We're seeing that China will be engaged by many European industries, companies, European leaders. That's a fact. The question is, with what message do you engage? If you engage China from the position of weakness, where you declare your dependence and strategic dependence on China, that puts us in a very disadvantaged position. And we've been in that position with Russia for a very long time. And therefore, I would very much like to see Europe being a proud shaper of world geopolitics when it comes to very important events. And for that, we need to engage, but also from the position of, I would call it strength. That it could be economic strength, it could be the strength that comes out from the risking that the President of the Commission is suggesting, and we are actually very much supportive of.
What do you make of that kind of language, John, about engaging China from a position of strength? From I think he didn't use the word decoupling from China, but he used a phrase that inferred decoupling from China as well. What do you make about all this anti-Chinese rhetoric, which is just growing and growing, and there seems to be no sense breaking through?
Well, I think it's hilarious coming from a country like Lithuania to be calling for a more aggressive approach towards China. It appears that the nearer a country is to Russia, the more aggressive they get on the international stage. And you'll see that with the Baltic states, with Poland, with Czechoslovakia, a few others as well, many of whom had close relations with the Nazis as well. So there's a lot of history going on here that's beneath the current pronouncements.
Yeah, it does seem quite insane. We have just some headlines we're going to bring up now in relation to a potential recession in Germany and a reduction in production. Let's have a look at that headline. So, fears of German recession grow after a sharp decline in industrial output. The automotive sector, considered the jewel of German industry, suffered the largest decline in month-over-month industrial output, down 6.5%, which is a whopping figure. We'll just have a look at some more of that text. German factory orders fell sharply in March as German industry suffered its sharpest decline since during the COVID-19 pandemic, new data released by the Federal Statistical Office show. Industrial orders dropped by 10.7% from the previous month, the largest month-over-month decline since 2020. Output also fell by 3.4%, significantly more than the 1.3% estimated by financial analysts. Poor performance across the car industry in particular impacted the data, with manufacturing of motor vehicles and parts dropping by 6.5%. Considered the jewel of German industry, the automotive sector employs around 12% of the country's manufacturing labour force and generates some 180 billion euros in revenue through the production of esteemed brands such as Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz and BMW. Construction output also declined by 4.6% over February, while machinery production fell by 3.4%. After a buoyant performance by industrial production at the beginning of the year, there was an unexpectedly sharp decline in March, the economics ministry said, as cited by Reuters. German manufacturing is suffering more and more from the global rate hikes, which are increasingly applying the brakes on the economy. Ralph Salvin, the German economist at Commerzbank, added, no mention of the shutdown from the Russian market. The data has once again sparked growing fears of a recession looming in Europe's powerhouse. This fear was dismissed by experts only a week ago after a 0.5% contraction in the German economy in the last quarter of 2022 was followed by stagnation in the first quarter of 2023. Germany going into recession. We hear lots of negative stories about the German economy. This seems to be for real. It's based on production figures themselves. What do you make about it, John?
Well, I mean, the easy answer is that we decided to block Russian energy, and the energy costs have spiraled. The energy we're getting from the United States is 4 to 5 times more expensive. So industry will pay a price for that. And unfortunately, the behemoths of industry in Europe are the Germans. So that's where you'll feel the pressure first. And that's only this year. The real problem is going to be next year, the next winter, because we had some reserves that we had in Europe for this year, and now we don't. So we're going to have serious problems next winter that will make today's problems seem like a house party.
So this is not getting better. This is going to get worse. I think with the retraction in the German motor vehicle production figures, I think some of that has to be laid at the doorstep of sanctions on Russia, because I know that the well-to-do Russians aspire to owning German cars, and with that market cut out, I'm sure that has to have an impact. It'd be ridiculous to suggest that it wouldn't have an impact on German production figures as well. Though that month-on-month impact, I'm not sure exactly what that major drop just for that 1 month is. Maybe there's something else happening as well. Just with that, John, Seymour Hersh, you mentioned on Ukraine Update, which is going out today as well. Ukraine Update is our other show in which we look at the news coming out from the NATO Russia-Ukraine war. You can get that on all our platforms as well. But you mentioned on that Seymour Hersh, the world famous, renowned and highly respected journalist, that he has put out information on his Substack to the effect that the allies of Ukraine are fast ready to abandon Ukraine now, and they're secretly calling on Zelensky to make peace, even if that means that he has to go himself. We'll just have a look at this image of a tweet. So this is Seymour Hersh, but something else is cooking. As some in the American intelligence community know and have reported in secret, at the instigation of government officials at various levels in Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, Estonia, Czechoslovakia and Latvia. These countries are all allies of Ukraine and declared enemies of Vladimir Putin. And if anybody wants to go on to Hersh's Substack, you can read for a lot more detail. But what he's saying here essentially is they want Zelensky to make peace or to go. What do you make of this story, John?
It's very interesting if true. because the states he's talking about include Poland, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, countries that would be extremely close to Ukraine. So it does make sense on the list of countries that he has given there. But they can say what they like. I mean, Zelensky will do what he's told. Unfortunately, it'll be the Americans and the British who decide what happens at the end of the day with regard to the war, not Zelensky. If he decides he wants to quit, he'll be quitted himself.
I suspect that there's major domestic pressure in those Eastern Bloc countries to bring an end to this war. On the one hand, they've got the highest inflation in Europe. Some of them are up at 25, close to 30% inflation a few months ago. I haven't checked it since, but I can't see it having gone down. On the other hand, they have been swamped by refugees from this war. They are suffering at every level other than being attacked physically themselves. And that's the next stage. And I'm sure domestically they don't want that. The population doesn't want that, and that they're pressurizing for peace. Do you feel that in those countries there's a domestic, if not subdued, peace movement, or at least a sense of a want of peace?
I don't. Certainly not in those countries, with the possible exception of Hungary, who tends to play it their own way. And they have been saying for quite some time that that's what they're interested in, is peace. But the other ones, not so much. I don't. When you
the population on the ground that's suffering, that's what I mean. The regular people. Do you think they might be starting to think they've had enough of this?
Well, if the pressure is hitting them in their day-to-day existence, you know, and if their hatred of all things Russian subsides because of that, that will be a good trick. I don't see it happening.
Okay, fingers crossed and wishful thinking.
Fingers crossed, of course, yeah. Well, any road to peace is a good one.
Yeah, but I think so many refugees go into those countries requiring services, requiring homes, all those kind of things, and at the same time such massively high inflation. Something's got to give, and I think that any half rational person could not but associate those living conditions that they have now with this war, and so come to the conclusion that the war has to come to a speedy end. I think that's where I would think that at least some of the population would be at mentally at the moment.
Yes, but the only thing that will end this war is security guarantees for Russia. I mean, that's what they've been looking since the end of the Cold War, when they were left out of the NATO arrangement. Even though they were interested in joining, they were kept out in the cold. So it remains to be seen what will happen after that.
Yeah, we'll just watch this space, I suppose. John, we're going to close up. We looked at what was happening in Pakistan last week. Imran Khan was arrested. Just as we were broadcasting last week, news of his release came out. We have a couple of videos of his release and of his home coming to Lahore, which is his core base of support in India, though he's support right across India. But Lahore is his real base. So we're going to have a look at those videos and we'll come back in a wee minute. So Imran Khan released again, put out a tweet, and we'll have a look at that tweet in a second, suggesting that he might be about to be arrested again. But what do you think about this, John? It seems to be that the courts are constantly interfering with the political machinations of Khan's opposition. What do you think?
Well, my suspicion is that the move by the Supreme Court there had saved Pakistan from terrible trouble. I mean, had he been kept in prison, there would have been all sorts of problems on the streets, and you wouldn't have known where it would have ended. But all of this began because he took a position that he wasn't going to go anti-Russia on behalf of the United States. That's why he's in this position. And it's a long way to go before this particular matter is sorted out.
It's a bit reflective, more radical and more violent, but it's reflective of also what's happening in Turkey and so many other countries where the US is putting on as much pressure as possible and where countries want to remain sovereign and independent-minded on the issue of this war. And yet every button has been pressed, every lever has been pulled that the United States can to change the purview of change the governments if necessary, but change the purview of those governments. Do you think America has, or the United States has almost expired all of those levers and all of that leverage?
It's hard to know. I mean, we're at the stage where their power is being tested for the first time ever. And this is a first. So you can watch for frayings all over the place. As some countries will stand up for themselves and think, okay, now we have a chance that the world is open in a multipolar way, that we don't have to do everything according to the gospel of the United States, that we can have an independent view, a neutral view, even if you like.
Yeah, and that's not really allowed. There still seem to be pushing in Pakistan. Here's a tweet that just went up a few hours ago from Imran Khan in relation to his status at the moment. Probably my last tweet before my next arrest. Police have surrounded my house, and there's a radio interview that he gave there as well. So he's still under pressure. I think you're right. Last week it looked like Pakistan was about to collapse into civil war. It's a nuclear armed country, so it's very worrying. Personally, my money would be overall on Khan succeeding in the end, though I think there'll be some bloodshed before he does, unfortunately.
I don't know about my money, but my hopes would be, certainly.
Yeah, maybe I should have phrased that a different way. That's all we have for this week, folks. Thanks for tuning in to World Update with John Moran. Subscribe, like, share on all the different platforms where you can. We're fighting those algorithms on your behalf. John, thanks for joining us again this week.
Thank you, Finbar.
And we'll see you next week, folks.
Bye-bye.